The flashing lights arrive before the questions do. Blue and red strobes sliding over the glass storefront, painting Dr. Elijah Brooks in alternating guilt and innocence like the world can't decide which he is. He stands beneath the awning of a corner electronics shop in Southeast Houston, one hand on the strap of his laptop bag, the other around a receipt for 3 USB-C cables and a pack of AA batteries. Officer Dalton Pierce steps out of the cruiser as if gravity treats him more gently than everyone else. Square jaw, square shoulders, everything else sharp enough to cut. "Sir," he calls like a warning. "We got a call. Suspicious activity." Elijah blinks, the word landing with the dull thud of a cliché. Suspicious. His mouth shapes the beginnings of an explanation. Mission control, hotfix, flight software, then closes. Say too much and it sounds like a lie. Say too little and it looks like you're hiding something. He opts for simple. "I'm headed to Johnson Space Center," he says. "Systems engineering. I just needed these." Pierce's eyes flick to the bag. "What's in there?" "My laptop and external drive." Elijah lifts the bag so the officer can see the outline. "I'm on call tonight." Behind the officer, a second cruiser whispers to a stop. Another cop, younger, jittery, fingers already drumming the holster as if rhythm keeps him calm. The nameplate reads, Reeves. Elijah feels the familiar heat at the base of his neck, the one that comes when people look at him and see everything except what he is. Inside the shop, the clerk peers over a display of phone cases, wide-eyed and unhelpful. Rain hangs in the air, undecided between mist and pour. Elijah glances at his watch. 18:07. He's already late. His phone buzzes once in his pocket. No ringtone. He silenced everything after the second urgent call. Aquila isn't a normal mission. It's America's proof that we still can thread a needle at 30,000 kilometers per hour and hit the eye of a storm we can't even see. An experimental Earth observation platform with attitude control bleeding fuel drifting toward a failure mode no one modeled. He wrote the patch at his kitchen table, heart hammering, coffee cold. It lives on the drive. It lives in the bag. "Step away from the door," Pierce says, nodding toward the wet sidewalk. "Hands where I can see them." Elijah obeys, the word cooperate pulsing in his mind like its own emergency beacon. He lifts his hands, palms out. "Officer, I can explain." "NASA?" "You have ID?" Pierce asks, already unimpressed. Elijah shifts slowly, producing a black badge with NASA printed in simple white. He offers it like a truce. Pierce holds it between two fingers, as if the laminate might lie to him. Reeves rounds behind Elijah, close enough for breath to be a problem. "Lot of folks carry fakes," Pierce says. "Call the number on the back," Elijah answers, patience measured down to the atom. "Ask for Flight Director Maya Ortiz. She'll confirm." Reeves gestures at the bag. "Open it." "It has proprietary hardware," Elijah says, then swallows the word please. "I need dry hands and a flat surface." Pierce smiles without humor. "You need to stop telling me what you need." Elijah kneels, sets the bag on the damp concrete, unzips it inch by controlled inch. The laptop gleams dull under streetlight. The drive, heat-scarred from the long compile, sits in a foam sleeve like a packed parachute. "Shop owner says you were casing the place," Reeves announces, because the universe loves a chorus. "I bought cables," Elijah replies. He lifts the receipt. "I can't upload a patch if my port fails. We have..." He checks his tongue. He doesn't say we have 2 hours before the fuel controller cycles and tumbles the bus. He doesn't say if we lose Star Tracker alignment, we lose the sky. Pierce snatches the receipt, looks without seeing. "What were you doing standing outside?" "Trying to get a signal," Elijah says. "Mission control secure line. My apartment Wi-Fi went down in the storm." Reeves drifts to the side, eyes cutting to the laptop, then to Elijah's face, then back again like he's expecting the machine to confess. "Bag looks like the ones from that theft ring last month," he mutters. Elijah breathes through his nose. "It's a standard Pelican case. If you walk into any lab in America, you'll..." "Hands behind your back," Pierce says. The words arrive colder than the rain. Elijah feels them settle. He turns, offers his wrists. The cuff ratchet clicks like a timer, marking off seconds he doesn't have. "Officer," he says, calm laid over panic like a thin blanket over a fire. "You're making a mistake that will be very public very soon." "Is that a threat?" Pierce leans in, breath coffee sour. "It's a prediction," Elijah replies. "There's a team in a room with no windows 5 miles from here who are waiting for me. Not because I'm special, Because I have the code that keeps tonight from being a failure you'll see from orbit. Reeves scoffs. Orbit, huh? Pierce nods to the squad car. Let's go. They guide him, not rough but not careful, toward the cruiser. The clerk watches from inside, hand over mouth as if the scene is too loud for a store that sells silence and earbuds. A couple across the street slows, one of them lifting a phone. Elijah turns his head so the camera catches his face. Not pleading, not proud, just present. In the back seat, the world is smaller, the kind of small that makes a man inventory his breath. Elijah counts the beats of the wipers. He thinks of Maya's voice saying, "If it rolls inverted, we lose lock. We need your patch in the loop before the next sunlit pass." He thinks of the patch like a life preserver in a black ocean. Pierce slides into the driver's seat, radio scratching unintelligible alphabet soup. Reeves takes the passenger side, twisting to look at Elijah through the grate. "You got any weapons?" "Only ideas," Elijah says, then lets the line die in the stale air. They pull away from the curb. The shop recedes, the lights smear. Houston's night rises to meet the storm. Elijah's phone, confiscated and bagged, buzzes itself into a plastic pocket on Pierce's belt. At Johnson, Maya paces in front of a wall of screens, headset askew, eyes scanning numbers that keep trying to run away. "Where is he?" she asks no one and everyone. Jay, the junior on comms, shrugs helplessly, then points at a blip of local news on the corner monitor. Live video of a black man being loaded into a cruiser in the rain outside an electronics store, captioned, "Suspicious person detained." Maya goes still. "Zoom that," she says. The image sharpens. The face is unmistakable. The bag, the cuffs. Someone swears. Someone else is already dialing. Maya presses her palms to the console and feels the whole room tilt. "Patch ETA?" the flight dynamics officer calls. Maya stares at the frozen frame of Elijah in the rain, the world misnaming him, the clock screaming. She answers like a vow. "Hours," she says, but not many. Outside the squad car window, the storm finally commits, rain coming down hard enough to erase the city. Elijah closes his eyes and starts to count again, not because numbers will save him, but because they're the only thing that makes sense when everything else doesn't. He counts to 60. He opens his eyes. The lights of the precinct rise ahead like a decision. The precinct smells of disinfectant and damp paper. Fluorescents hum like insects, flickering just enough to unsettle. Elijah Brooks has walked past the desk sergeant, still cuffed, laptop bag slung over Officer Pierce's shoulder like stolen evidence. "Suspicion of theft," Pierce mutters, sliding the arrest form forward. The desk sergeant, an older man with gray at his temples, barely glances at Elijah. "Tag the property, put him in holding." Elijah tries again. "Please, call NASA's Johnson Space Center. Ask for Director Maya Ortiz. They're expecting me. My badge." "Save it for your attorney," Pierce interrupts. The sergeant shrugs. "One call after intake? That's policy." The cuffs bite deeper as Reeves steers Elijah down a hallway. The metal doors ahead sigh open with a pneumatic hiss. Inside the holding cell, time stretches. The walls are pale cinder block, the bench a steel slab bolted to the floor. Elijah sits, back straight, mind racing faster than the clock. His patch is still on that drive, zipped away in his bag, now sealed in property. He closes his eyes and maps the failure tree again. Fuel controller cycles at 21:15, star tracker goes blind, bus rotates uncontrolled. Loss of lock, satellite tumbles into dark. Billions of dollars, years of work, a nation's pride, all for nothing. He breathes slow, trying to quiet the panic. He thinks of numbers. He thinks of orbits. He thinks of Maya's voice. "We need your patch in the loop before the next sunlit pass." The sound of boots on tile pulls him back. Pierce appears at the bars, arms folded. "So Doc, what's NASA's big emergency? Aliens?" Elijah meets his gaze evenly. "A satellite drift. If it goes uncontrolled, you'll see it on every news channel within hours." Pierce smirks. "Or maybe you're just a guy with a fake badge and a good story." Back at Johnson Space Center, Maya Ortiz is anything but calm. She paces the mission control floor, headset pressed tight, her other hand clutching a styrofoam cup of untouched coffee. The big screens show Aquila's telemetry stream in sickly reds and yellows. Attitude control struggling, fuel bleed worsening. The predicted loss of lock timer shrinks second by second. "Flight," Jay calls from comms. "Still no sign of Brooks. Local PD confirmed an arrest report, but they're stonewalling us." Maya's jaw tightens. "Get me the mayor's office and patch in public affairs. I want a statement ready." One of the controllers hesitates. You're going public? Maya nods, voice hard. If they won't release him, we'll force it. He has the patch. Without it, we're blind. At the precinct, Elijah sits upright as the desk sergeant finally approaches. You get one call. Make it count. Elijah takes the receiver with hands still cuffed in front. The sergeant dials. Elijah rattles off the number by memory. It rings once, twice, then connects. Johnson Space Center, Mission Control, a voice answers. This is Dr. Elijah Brooks, he says, steady. Tell Flight Director Ortiz I'm being held at Houston PD East Precinct. Property tag has my laptop and external drive. You need the patch before the next sunlit pass. The line goes silent. Then, copy, stand by. Moments later, Maya's voice, sharp and urgent. Elijah, are you safe? Cuffed but unharmed, he says. They think I'm suspicious. I don't have my system. You wrote the patch? Yes, it's on the drive. Then listen carefully. We'll get you out. Hold on. The line clicks dead. Elijah lowers the receiver slowly, eyes closed in brief relief. Minutes later, the precinct phones begin to ring in chorus. The desk sergeant answers one, frowning. Yes, ma'am? Yes, we have a Dr. Brooks in custody. NASA? Another line lights up. Another sergeant picks it up, his expression shifting. White House liaison? Sir, Within 5 minutes, every phone at the desk is lit, voices shouting over each other, urgency cutting through procedure. Pierce watches, brow furrowed. What the hell's going on? The older sergeant slams down a receiver. You two brought in Brooks? Pierce smirks. Yeah, suspicious behavior. Suspicious? The sergeant growls. You've got the lead systems engineer for Aquila in holding. NASA's calling him a national hero. Pierce's smirk falters. In the cell, Elijah waits, counting heartbeats. The door finally opens, the sergeant himself entering. Dr. Brooks, he says, suddenly formal, there's been a misunderstanding. You're being released immediately. Your property will be returned. Elijah stands slowly. Hours lost, he mutters, but not all. Pierce lingers near the doorway, face pale. Elijah pauses just long enough to meet his eyes. Respect isn't suspicion, officer. You'll learn that. Then he walks out, free again. At Mission Control, the room erupts as the call comes through. Brooks is out, en route. Maya exhales hard, relief washing over her features. Then we still have a chance. The countdown clock ticks mercilessly toward failure. But now, hope travels in the backseat of a car speeding toward Johnson, a laptop bag finally back in its rightful hands. And in that bag sits a patch that could keep America's sky from going dark. The city blurs outside the window of the unmarked government sedan. Elijah Brooks sits in the back seat, laptop bag finally in his lap, hands flexing against the phantom ache of cuffs. 2 NASA security officers right up front, silent, focused. The digital clock on the dash reads 2034. Less than an hour until the satellite's fuel controller cycles. Elijah powers on the laptop, the familiar boot screen spilling blue light across his face. He slides the external drive into its port, tapping rapidly. Command prompts streaming across the screen. Lines of code bloom like rows of marching soldiers. Telemetry feed? He asks. The officer in the passenger seat turns. Encrypted uplink waiting at Johnson. You'll have full access once we're through the gate. Elijah nods, jaw tight. He knows how little margin remains. The patch must be uploaded before Aquila enters its next sunlit pass. Otherwise, the satellite's guidance system will tumble, dragging the spacecraft into a blind spin from which recovery is almost impossible. At Mission Control, Flight Director Maya Ortiz leans over the console, headset tight, eyes scanning the red line telemetry. Numbers bleed downward, propellant levels, attitude control tolerances, battery reserves. Give me estimates, she demands. A voice from guidance replies, we project loss of lock at 2118. Without correction, uncontrolled spin within 5 minutes of cycle. Maya swears under her breath. Where's Brooks? ETA 10 minutes, the security officer reports. That'll leave us with less than 30, Maya mutters. She straightens, voice iron. Prepare the uplink channel. As soon as his patch is ready, we shoot it. The entire room hums with urgency. Controllers lean forward, eyes fixed, pencils tapping nervously on notepads. No one mentions the news tickers already buzzing on the side screens. NASA scientist wrongfully arrested, released under pressure. At the precinct, Officer Pierce scrolls through the same headlines on his phone. His face is pale, jaw tight. Every outlet carries the photo of Elijah in cuffs, bag slung like contraband. Commentators call it racial profiling. Senators call it disgraceful. Pierce tosses the phone aside, muttering, "We were doing our job." But even to his own ears, the words sound hollow. In the holding room, his partner Reeves shakes his head. "We just made him a hero." The sedan screeches to a halt at Johnson's secure gate. Guards wave it through without pause. Elijah bolts from the back seat, laptop open, sprinting toward the control room with the two officers trailing behind. His shoes slap the linoleum halls, breath sharp in his chest. The door bursts open. Mission Control freezes. Heads turn. Then the room erupts in applause. Maya strides forward. "Elijah, thank God." "No time," he answers, rushing to the nearest console. He plugs the drive into the secure port, fingers already typing commands. The screen fills with cascading code. "Talk to me," Maya demands. "The patch will stabilize the fuel controller and reroute excess flow," Elijah explains rapidly. "It'll buy us attitude control long enough to correct drift." "Time to compile?" 6 minutes. The room holds its breath as numbers tick across the screen. Outside, news vans line the street. Reporters speak breathlessly into cameras. Dr. Elijah Brooks, detained just hours ago under false suspicion, is now back inside Johnson, working to save NASA's flagship satellite. Crowds gather beyond the barricades, holding homemade signs. "Respect our heroes and science needs freedom." Back inside, the patch compiles cleanly. Elijah exhales for the first time since leaving his apartment. Ready to uplink, Maya gives the order. "Open channel." A controller responds, "Channel open, go for uplink." Elijah hits enter. Code surges upward out of Houston through satellites already in orbit to a lonely spacecraft skimming the edge of night. For long seconds, nothing happens. Then the telemetry screens flicker, numbers stabilize, red bleeds into yellow, then into cautious green. The star tracker realigns. The drift slows. The room explodes in cheers. Maya grips Elijah's shoulder. "You just saved Aquila." Elijah allows himself a thin smile. "No, I saved us from losing it. Aquila saved itself once the patch landed." But outside the control room, the story is no longer just about a satellite. It's about a black scientist handcuffed on a sidewalk for looking suspicious. Hours before he became the man who kept America's sky from going dark. Networks roll the footage side by side. Elijah in cuffs, rain streaking his face, then Elijah in mission control, lit by screens, saving billions. The contrast is too sharp to ignore. Later, when the adrenaline fades, Elijah sits alone in a quiet corridor. His laptop rests beside him, bag finally still. Maya approaches, leaning against the wall. "You realize what just happened?" she asks. He nods. "The patch worked." "That's not what I mean," she says softly. "You went from suspect to hero in less than a day. The whole country's watching." Elijah closes his eyes. "Then let them watch. Maybe they'll see the truth this time." Maya places a hand on his shoulder. "They will. You've earned it." Elijah opens his eyes, gazing back toward the humming control room. For the first time in hours, he feels the storm inside him settle. The sky is safe, for now. But on the ground, a different reckoning has only just begun. Morning breaks over Houston, and the story has already spread farther than telemetry beams can travel. Every major outlet plays the same footage on repeat. Dr. Elijah Brooks in cuffs, rain dripping off his jaw, contrasted with clips of him hours later in mission control, fingers flying across the keyboard, stabilizing Aquila against impossible odds. Headlines clash across the crawl bars of news broadcasts, from suspect to savior. NASA engineer detained before saving mission. Hero in handcuffs. Elijah wakes to the murmur of televisions echoing through the hotel lobby. Naomi meets him downstairs, eyes tired, phone buzzing nonstop. "Reporters won't stop calling," she says. "Half the country wants interviews. The other half wants explanations from the police." Elijah shakes his head. "I don't want a spotlight. I want a lab, a quiet room, and work that speaks louder than headlines." Naomi frowns. "It's not about what you want anymore. They made you the face of something bigger." At the Houston Police Department, Officer Pierce sits stiff-backed in the captain's office. The air is thick with disapproval. "You realize what you did?" the captain growls. "You cuffed the man NASA is calling a national hero. Within hours of his arrest, he saved their billion-dollar mission." Pierce stiffens. He looks suspicious. standing outside, casing the shop. It was procedure. Procedure, the captain spits. Procedure doesn't make the evening news and trigger congressional inquiries. You embarrass this department, and you embarrass this city. Reeves, seated beside him, avoids eye contact, his knee bouncing nervously. The captain slams a folder shut. There will be consequences. Back at Johnson, the mission control team is still buzzing from the narrow save. Screens now glow green, telemetry stable. Yet Maya Ortiz knows the real turbulence is outside their walls. She stands before a cluster of reporters, cameras flashing. Dr. Brooks is one of the finest engineers I've ever had the honor to work with. Without his patch, Aquila would be spinning blind in orbit right now. His wrongful arrest is not just a personal injustice, it nearly cost this nation a mission. The reporters fire questions like bullets. Was this racial profiling? Will NASA file a complaint? How close was Aquila to failure? Maya answers carefully, but her fury simmers beneath every word. Elijah, meanwhile, tries to slip into a side entrance to avoid reporters, but the crowd outside Johnson is too large. They hold signs hastily scrawled, "Respect our scientists and not suspicious, essential." Microphones thrust toward him. "Dr. Brooks, do you feel vindicated? Do you plan to sue the police department? What would you say to the officers who detained you?" He stops only once, his voice steady. Respect is not suspicion. Last night, the world learned that truth. The crowd erupts, cameras clicking. Elijah walks on, his laptop bag clutched tight, more shield than accessory. In Washington, lawmakers take notice. By afternoon, a congresswoman addresses the House floor. "We nearly lost a $1 billion satellite because a black scientist carrying a laptop bag was profiled. This is not just injustice, it's dangerous to national security." Clips of her speech join the endless rotation on cable news. Elijah's face, half lit by police car strobes, half lit by mission control monitors, becomes a symbol. In the evening, Elijah finally retreats to his apartment. Naomi arrives with takeout containers, insisting he eat. He sits at the kitchen table, laptop open, code still scrolling from last night's save. "I'm tired," he admits quietly. "Not from the work, from the weight." Naomi sets down the containers. "You didn't ask for this, but you can't walk away now. People are watching. They see in you what they hope for. Dignity, brilliance, calm under fire." Elijah exhales. "They see what they want, not what I am." Naomi meets his gaze firmly. "Then show them both." Across town, Officer Pierce drinks alone in a dim bar. Television replaying Elijah's arrest yet again. Patrons mutter, shaking their heads. One sneers at Pierce. "That's you, right? The guy who cuffed the hero?" Pierce slams his glass down. He looks suspicious. The laughter that follows is cruel, and this time it's aimed at him. That night, Elijah steps onto his balcony, looking up at the stars he helped keep in view. Somewhere up there, Aquila holds steady, its instruments alive because of his code. He whispers into the night, "I carried you once, now you carry us all." Naomi joins him, resting her head against his arm. "You turned suspicion into respect, Elijah, and the whole country saw it." For the first time since the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, Elijah allows himself to breathe. The sky above is clear, steady, unbroken. By the next morning, Elijah Brooks's name was etched into every corner of the national conversation. News anchors described him with reverence. The scientist who saved a mission after being treated like a suspect. Newspapers ran dual images side by side, Elijah in cuffs under pouring rain, and Elijah in mission control, code glowing across his face. Social media carried a new rallying cry. Hashtags trended. #respect. Science. #hero in handcuffs. #not suspicious. Students uploaded videos saying, "I want to be like Dr. Brooks." Veterans posted messages. He served his country in space, not the battlefield, but with the same courage. Elijah woke to the sound of Naomi's phone, buzzing non-stop on the kitchen counter. She scrolled through hundreds of messages. "Look at this. Chicago, Atlanta, San Francisco. People are holding vigils outside planetariums and science museums. They're chanting your name." Elijah rubbed his temples. "I never wanted chants. Equations don't need applause. They just need to work." Naomi studied him. "Equations don't get profiled on the street. People do. That's why they're chanting." At the Houston Police Department, the pressure was suffocating. The chief stood at a podium, reporters firing questions. Will Officer Pierce be disciplined? Do you consider this racial profiling? Did you endanger a national mission by detaining Dr. Brooks? The chief cleared his throat. We acknowledge mistakes were made. An internal investigation is underway. It was too little, too late. Protesters stood outside the building with signs. Science isn't suspicious and respect our heroes. Pierce watched from a side window, his jaw tight. Inside the locker room, Reeves muttered, "We're finished." Pierce snapped back, "We followed procedure." Reeves just shook his head. Procedure doesn't matter when the world decides you're wrong. Back at Johnson Space Center, Maya Ortiz guided her team through post-patch diagnostics. Aquila's instruments were steady, data streams humming clean. Relief pulsed through the room, but Maya knew the mission was no longer the only story. Reporters crowded outside the gates, demanding more interviews. NASA officials debated how to handle Elijah's sudden fame. One executive muttered, "He's bigger than the mission now." Maya silenced him with a glare. "No, he's the mission. Because people like him keep the sky alive. And because people like you let him be cuffed in the rain." That evening, Elijah finally agreed to one interview. He sat across from a journalist in a modest studio, lights glaring, microphones close. "Dr. Brooks," the interviewer began, "the world now sees you as a national hero. How do you feel about being wrongfully detained hours before saving the mission?" Elijah chose his words carefully. "I feel what I've always felt. Respect is not suspicion. The two can't live in the same room. What happened to me wasn't just about me. It's about how quickly we decide who belongs and who doesn't." The interviewer leaned forward. "Do you forgive the officers who detained you?" Elijah paused, eyes steady. "Forgiveness is possible, but accountability comes first. Because respect without accountability is just another word." The clip aired that night, sparking debate across dinner tables and Senate floors alike. In neighborhoods across America, the respect movement began to take shape. What started as vigils grew into organized marches. Teachers led lessons about Elijah's work. Churches held forums on dignity. Children carried cardboard signs with one word: respect. Naomi watched one broadcast, tears in her eyes. "They're building something, Elijah. Bigger than you." He shook his head softly. "Good. It needs to outgrow me. Movements die if they stay chained to one man." In his apartment, Officer Pierce scrolled through angry headlines until his hands shook. Every outlet showed his face, sneering beside Elijah's as he cuffed him. He muttered bitterly, "They turned him into a saint and me into a monster." Reeves Bana sat across the room, pale. "Maybe we should have listened. He told us who he was." Pierce slammed the phone down. "Doesn't matter now. They've chosen their hero." But even as he said it, he knew respect couldn't be reclaimed by bitterness. That night, Elijah stood on his balcony, Naomi at his side. The city lights shimmered like distant stars. He looked up at the real sky, where Aquila still spun steady, alive because of his patch. Naomi whispered, "You saved more than a satellite. You gave people something to believe in." Elijah breathed deeply, the weight pressing but no longer crushing. "Then let them carry it now. I'm just one man. Respect belongs to all." Far above, the satellite traced its orbit, a silent witness to both the storm and the calm that followed. By the third day, Elijah Brooks's face was no longer just a news story. It was a fixture on front pages, a constant presence in congressional inboxes, and the subject of thousands of conversations across the country. Students shared his story in classrooms, veterans carried his image at rallies, and lawmakers quoted his words on the floor. In the quiet of his apartment, Elijah sat at the kitchen table, laptop closed for once. Naomi scrolled through her buzzing phone. "Another request," she said, holding up the screen. "This time from Washington. They want you to testify before the House Committee on Science and Justice." Elijah shook his head. "I'm an engineer, Naomi. I write code. I don't write speeches." Naomi leaned forward, her eyes steady. "You've already spoken. Every word you've said since the cuffs clicked has been a speech. People are listening." A knock on the door interrupted them. A NASA liaison stood outside, briefcase in hand. "Dr. Brooks," she said formally, "the administrator would like you on a flight to D.C. tomorrow morning. They're calling you not just a scientist, but a national hero. The president may want to meet you." Elijah closed his eyes. The weight of expectation pressed harder. At NASA headquarters, the debate was already fierce. Executives crowded around a long table, media clips playing on screens along the walls. "Brooks's story is everywhere," one official said. "We need to leverage this for funding. Public sympathy is sky high." Another shook his head. He's not a politician. He doesn't want to be a symbol. Maya Ortiz, patched in from Johnson, cut through the noise. He doesn't want it, but he already is. If you force him, you'll lose him. If you support him, he'll move mountains. The room fell quiet. Meanwhile, at the Houston Police Department, Officer Pierce sat through another grilling. Internal Affairs had compiled every angle of his arrest, every comment he made, every second of Elijah in cuffs. This wasn't just a mistake, the investigator said coldly. This was profiling, and now it's a scandal threatening national security. Pierce clenched his jaw. I followed procedure. Procedure doesn't excuse bias, the investigator replied. You turned a hero into a suspect. You humiliated this department. Reeves, seated nearby, rubbed his temples. We didn't just humiliate the department, we humiliated ourselves. Elijah boarded the flight to Washington the next morning, laptop bag resting in the overhead like a constant reminder. Naomi sat beside him, eyes bright with pride and worry. Do you realize what this means? She whispered. You're going to speak where history is written. Elijah stared out the window as clouds drifted beneath the wing. History writes people into places they never asked to be. Naomi touched his hand gently. Then maybe you're the right one, because you didn't ask. The arrival in D.C. was chaos. Reporters swarmed the terminal, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Guards formed a human barrier as Elijah and Naomi were ushered into a waiting car. One reporter's question broke through the noise. Dr. Brooks, what does respect mean to you now? Elijah paused before entering the car, his voice carrying above the crowd. Respect means listening before judging. It means treating humanity as evidence enough. The answer ricocheted through headlines within minutes. That evening, Elijah sat in a modest hotel room 2 blocks from the Capitol. Naomi spread papers across the bed, briefing notes, sample questions, outlines prepared by aides. They'll ask about Aquila, she explained. But they'll also ask about the arrest. They want to tie it together, the science and the injustice. Elijah leaned back in the chair. One is numbers. One is prejudice. They shouldn't belong in the same sentence. Naomi looked at him sadly. But they do. Because of you. Across the city, lawmakers debated how to frame his testimony. Some wanted him to be a symbol of resilience. Others wanted to use him to push reform bills. Few cared what he wanted himself. Maya Ortiz called Elijah late that night. You don't have to give them what they want, she said firmly. Just give them truth. That's all you've ever done. Elijah smiled faintly. Truth is the only language I know. At the police department, Pierce scrolled through news feeds in bitter silence. His own face appeared next to Elijah's in every article. The officer who mocked, the officer who cuffed. Reeves muttered, they're calling him a hero in D.C. now, and us, we're a footnote to his story. Pierce's fists clenched. I won't be forgotten. But even he knew, respect couldn't be stolen back. On the eve of his testimony, Elijah stood on the hotel balcony, Naomi beside him. The Capitol dome glowed in the distance. Tomorrow, she whispered, you speak to the nation. Elijah looked up at the stars, steady in their silence. Somewhere above, Aquila sailed on, its orbit stable because of his code. I'll speak, he said quietly. Not for me, for respect. Because respect must outlive the storm. Naomi leaned against him, her voice firm. And it will. Because of you. The hearing room on Capitol Hill is packed to the rafters. Lawmakers line the dais, aides shuffle papers nervously, cameras crowd the back wall. The hum of whispered speculation fills the air until the sergeant-at-arms calls for order. When Dr. Elijah Brooks enters, the room falls silent. He walks steadily, laptop bag over his shoulder like armor, Naomi trailing behind him with quiet resolve. He takes his seat at the witness table, raises his right hand and swears the oath. The chairman clears his throat. Dr. Brooks, thank you for appearing. The nation watched your ordeal. We want to hear, in your words, what happened. Elijah leans forward, microphone catching his steady tone. I was detained outside an electronics shop. My crime, apparently, was carrying a laptop bag and standing in the rain. Hours later, I was asked to stabilize Aquila, a satellite carrying the work of thousands. Both moments are linked by one truth. Suspicion without respect nearly cost us everything. The room murmurs. Lawmakers exchange glances. A congresswoman from New York leans in. Dr. Brooks, were you profiled because you are black? Elijah's gaze is unwavering. Yes, I was. Let's not dance around it. If I looked different, those cuffs would not have closed around my wrists. But bias doesn't just wound dignity. It endangers missions, undermines trust, and costs time we cannot afford. Reporters scribble furiously. The words scroll across live television feeds within seconds. Bias endangers more than dignity. It endangers lives. Another lawmaker presses. Do you forgive the officers who detained you? Elijah pauses, his voice calm but firm. Forgiveness is possible. Accountability comes first. Respect without accountability is just a hollow word. Naomi, seated behind him, nods proudly. The questioning shifts to science. A senator asks, Dr. Brooks, how close did we come to losing Aquila? Elijah opens his laptop, screen angled toward the dais. He pulls up telemetry logs, graphs of tumbling values, then the green stabilization line after his patch. Within minutes. Without the patch, we would have lost orbit lock, lost the instruments, lost the mission. Billions wasted, data gone, reputation damaged. We were that close. The senators sit in stunned silence. The contrast, heroic code against humiliating cuffs, is undeniable. Outside the hearing, crowds fill the Capitol steps. Signs wave, respect our scientists. Not suspicious, essential. Chants roll like surf. Reporters broadcast live, narrating every exchange inside the chamber. Back in Houston, Officer Pierce watches the broadcast from his apartment. He hears Elijah's calm words about accountability and feels his stomach churn. Reeves texts him, We're done. The whole country's against us. Pierce throws the phone aside, muttering, They'll forget me. They always forget the cops. But he knows this time, forgetting is the best he can hope for. Back inside the chamber, Elijah delivers his closing remarks. I'm not a politician, I'm an engineer. I solve problems with code, not with speeches. But what I learned in that cell is this. Respect must be more than a slogan. It must be practice. If we treat each other as suspicious before we treat each other as human, then we don't just lose dignity, we risk losing everything else along with it. The room erupts in applause. Cameras flash, lawmakers rise to their feet. Naomi feels tears sting her eyes as she joins in the ovation. That evening, Elijah stands outside the Capitol, the crowd chanting his name. Reporters swarm, but he raises his hand. I didn't come here for applause, he says into the microphones. I came here to remind us, respect isn't suspicion. Respect is earned, given, shared. If you carry that forward, then this day means something. The chant shifts, thousands of voices thundering, Respect! Respect! Naomi clutches his arm, whispering, You gave them more than testimony. You gave them truth. Elijah exhales, looking at the dome glowing against the night sky. Truth is the only thing worth carrying. Back at his hotel, Elijah finally allows himself a rare smile. Naomi brings him coffee, and together they sit in silence. The television plays highlights of the testimony, pundits dissecting his every word. He ignores them, focusing instead on the memory of the crowd chanting not his name, but the word that mattered most, respect. Maya Ortiz calls from Houston. You did good, Brooks. You stabilized more than a satellite today. Elijah chuckles softly. Let's just hope it stays in orbit. Both of them will, Maya replies. Far above, Aquila glides smoothly, instruments steady, orbit unbroken. It is proof, Elijah thinks, that even fragile systems can be saved if corrected in time. Maybe people are the same. The morning after Elijah Brooks's testimony, Washington woke to headlines that blazed like wildfire. Respect, not suspicion. Brooks captivates Congress. NASA scientist, bias. Nearly cost the nation a mission. Hero in handcuffs tells America the truth. Clips of Elijah's calm, deliberate words looped endlessly on every network. Students replayed them in classrooms, activists quoted them at rallies, even late-night hosts recited his line, Respect without accountability is just a hollow word. In the hotel lobby, Elijah walked past a television carrying the footage. Patrons looked up and applauded softly. He nodded politely, uneasy. Naomi joined him, holding coffee. You realize what you've done, don't you? She asked. I testified, Elijah said simply. No, Naomi replied, shaking her head. You set something in motion. They're calling it the respect movement now, Elijah. It's not just vigils anymore. They're organizing. Chapters in cities, community boards, policy groups. Elijah sighed, shoulders heavy. Movements need people who believe in them, not symbols to weigh them down. Sometimes they need both, Naomi said gently. At NASA headquarters, Maya Ortiz faced a press pool that looked more like a Senate hearing than a science briefing. Questions flew fast. What reforms does NASA support to prevent racial profiling of its staff? Will Dr. Brooks receive an official commendation? Can you confirm the president requested a meeting? Maya raised her hands for quiet. Dr. Brooks is an engineer who did his job. His work saved a mission, but his dignity should never have been questioned in the first place. NASA will always stand with its people because respect isn't optional, it's foundational. The applause from reporters surprised even her. Meanwhile, at the Houston Police Department, fallout deepened. Officer Pierce sat stone-faced in another internal hearing. The chief glared across the table. "You've embarrassed this department, this city, and this country. Congress is quoting Brooks. NASA is condemning us. Do you understand what you've done?" Pierce clenched his jaw. He looked suspicious. That's all. Reeves, seated beside him, finally spoke. "We ruined him before we even knew who he was. We didn't see a scientist. We saw a suspect." The chief slammed a hand on the table. "And that's the problem. You didn't see him at all." Back in D.C., lawmakers seized on Elijah's testimony. A bipartisan group announced draft legislation that morning, cameras flashing as they outlined the Respect and Accountability Act. It called for stronger anti-profiling measures, mandatory bias training, and new safeguards for professionals working in sensitive fields like science and national security. One senator declared, "If suspicion can nearly cost us $1 billion satellite, it's not just immoral, it's dangerous." Clips of the speech went viral. Elijah, however, wanted none of it. That evening, in the quiet of his hotel room, he sat with Naomi watching the news. The ticker scrolled. "Brooks to be honored at White House next week." "I didn't ask for honors," Elijah muttered. Naomi touched his arm. "You didn't ask to be cuffed either, but here we are." He looked at her, weary. "Symbols break, Naomi. They're fragile. What happens when they realize I'm just a man who writes code?" "Then they'll see you more clearly," she replied. On the Capitol steps, a rally swelled. Thousands gathered, holding candles, waving signs. Children recited Elijah's words. Veterans saluted. Clergy prayed aloud. The chant rose again, unified and deafening. "Respect! Respect!" From the hotel balcony, Elijah watched the glow of candles stretch into the night. Naomi joined him. "They're not chanting your name anymore," she said softly. "They're chanting the word. That's how you know it's real." Elijah exhaled. "Then maybe I've already done my part." In prison, Brett Kincaid, fired, convicted on unrelated charges, sat hunched in the corner of his cell, watching the rally on a grainy television. His face hardened as the chant rolled across the screen. "Respect," he muttered bitterly. "They gave him everything. They left me with nothing." His cellmate glanced over. "Maybe because he earned it." Kincaid's jaw tightened. He turned away, but the words clung to him like chains heavier than iron. Back in D.C., Elijah finally allowed himself a rare smile as he closed his laptop. Aquila's data streamed cleanly on the screen. Above the Earth, the satellite sailed steady, its orbit unbroken, a quiet testament to code written under pressure. Naomi leaned against him. "You carried a mission. You carried a movement. Now maybe it's time to carry yourself." Elijah gazed at the sky through the hotel window. "Respect doesn't belong to me, but if it outlives me, then it was worth it." Outside, the chant still echoed, but softer now, like a heartbeat steady enough to endure. The invitation arrived sealed with the presidential crest. Naomi opened it at the hotel table, eyes widening. "Elijah," she whispered, "the president wants to meet you tomorrow. Not just a photo op, an Oval Office briefing." Elijah set down his coffee, the steam curling between them. "I'm an engineer, Naomi, not a statesman. What do I tell the leader of the free world?" Naomi smiled faintly. "The same thing you told Congress. The truth." By dawn, the White House was buzzing. Reporters filled the lawn, cameras poised for the arrival of the man now dubbed the hero in handcuffs. Protesters stood outside the gates as well. Their signs pointed not at Elijah, but at injustice itself. Respect is not optional. Respect is essential. Inside, aides prepped the Roosevelt room. The president, a seasoned politician with sharp eyes softened by experience, tapped his pen on a briefing folder. "This man was arrested hours before saving our satellite?" he asked an advisor. "Yes, sir," came the reply. "NASA calls him indispensable. The country calls him a hero." The president closed the folder. "Then he'll have my ear." Elijah entered the White House with Naomi at his side, flanked by NASA officials. Secret Service agents guided them through long corridors until the Oval Office doors opened. The president rose, extending his hand. "Dr. Brooks, this nation owes you thanks, not only for saving Aquila, but for reminding us of something far more fragile than satellites: respect." Elijah shook his hand firmly, his voice steady. "Mr. President, I only did my job. The greater danger is how quickly suspicion nearly cost us everything." The president gestured to the chairs. "Then tell me what needs to change." For the next hour, Elijah spoke plainly. He described the night in the cell, the weight of cuffs on wrists that should have been typing code. He described the mission, the patch, the thin line between success and failure. Naomi listened silently, watching as the president scribbled notes. Elijah concluded, "Respect isn't just morality, it's national security. If we treat scientists, engineers, or any citizen as suspicious before we treat them as human, we don't just lose dignity. We risk losing missions, data, progress, everything." The president leaned back, eyes sharp. "Then perhaps your testimony belongs not just in Congress, but in the laws we pass next." Outside, reporters swarmed as Elijah exited the White House, microphones thrust forward. "Dr. Brooks, how was your meeting? Did the president promise reforms? Are you a symbol of the new civil rights era?" Elijah paused on the steps, Naomi at his side, cameras flashing. His words were calm but carried like a signal. "I'm not a symbol. I'm a reminder. Respect must not be treated as optional. If we learned anything this week, it's that suspicion without respect doesn't just harm people, it harms nations." The crowd erupted, the phrase plastered across screens within minutes. Respect is not optional. That night, Elijah and Naomi returned to their hotel exhausted. She turned on the television, and every channel replayed his words. International broadcasts carried the story, subtitles rolling across screens in Paris, Tokyo, Nairobi, Rio. "Elijah," Naomi said softly, "it's not just America. They're listening everywhere." He exhaled, shoulders heavy. "Then let them carry it. Respect doesn't need borders." Meanwhile, at the Houston Police Department, the scandal reached breaking point. The chief held a tense press conference. Effective immediately, Officer Brett Pierce is suspended pending investigation. His actions undermined public trust and endangered a national mission. We condemn bias in all forms. Reporters pounced with questions. "Is this enough? Will there be charges?" Outside, protesters shouted louder. "Accountability is respect." Pierce watched the coverage from his apartment, the walls closing in. His face, once just a local badge, was now a national symbol of disgrace. Reeves sent him a single text. "It's over." Pierce didn't reply. At NASA, Maya Ortiz gathered her team. She spoke with pride but also urgency. "Dr. Brooks's courage has given us more than a mission save. He's given us momentum. Now we need to build on it, not with speeches but with results. Let's keep proving what respect can do." The room erupted in applause, not just for Elijah, but for each other. Later that night, Elijah stood again on his balcony. Naomi joined him, arms folded against the cool air. The Capitol dome glowed in the distance, the city alive with lights. Naomi whispered, "Today, you sat with the president. You stood for millions. Do you realize how far you've come?" Elijah's gaze lifted to the stars, steady above. "I didn't come anywhere. Respect did. I just carried it far enough for others to see." He breathed deep, the night calm at last. Aquila sailed silently overhead, proof that even fragile systems could be saved when guided with care. And below, a movement once sparked by injustice now burned with purpose, its echo carried from Congress to communities, from America to the world. The morning after the White House meeting, Elijah Brooks awoke to find himself not just in American headlines, but on front pages across the globe. In London, The Guardian ran, "NASA scientist wrongfully arrested, rightfully honored." In Tokyo, papers called him the man who saved Aquila. In Nairobi, bold type read, "Respect is not optional, a message to the world." Naomi flipped through her phone at the breakfast table, showing Elijah the clippings one by one. "You're everywhere. Europe, Asia, Africa, they're quoting you." Elijah rubbed his forehead. "I'm not comfortable being quoted like scripture. I'm an engineer, not a prophet." Naomi smiled softly. "Maybe the world doesn't care what you call yourself. They just know you stood where others fell silent." At the United Nations headquarters in New York, ambassadors murmured as Elijah's testimony replayed on massive screens in the lobby. Delegates pointed at the caption, "Respect without accountability is just a hollow word." Some nations cited it in speeches about fairness, others tied it to scientific cooperation. A delegate from Brazil remarked, "If respect can stabilize orbits in space, perhaps it can stabilize relationships on Earth." The words carried farther than Elijah ever imagined. Meanwhile, back in Houston, Officer Pierce's downfall accelerated. Local papers plastered his image under the headline, "Suspended Officer Embarrasses City." Neighbors avoided his gaze. His phone buzzed with messages he no longer opened. Reeves called him once more. "They're forming an official review board, Brett. You'll be lucky if suspension is all you get." Pierce gritted his teeth. "He ruined me." Reeves snapped back, "No, you ruined yourself. He just showed the world who you really were." Pierce ended the call, silence heavier than any cuffs he'd ever locked on another man. Back in D.C., Elijah met with congressional aides drafting the Respect and Accountability Act. Papers were spread across the table, each section bearing his influence. "This bill strengthens anti-profiling measures," an aide explained. "But we want your voice attached. It'll pass faster if the public sees it tied to you." Elijah frowned. "Laws should stand on their own. My name isn't what makes them true." Naomi leaned in gently. "But attaching your name might be what makes them real." Elijah sighed. "Then make it about respect, not Brooks. I don't want monuments. I want change." That evening, Elijah agreed to appear at a televised town hall. The audience was diverse: students, veterans, community leaders. The moderator asked, "Dr. Brooks, what does respect mean in practice, not just in words?" Elijah's answer was simple. Respect is listening first. Respect is assuming dignity before suspicion. Respect is remembering that titles, uniforms, or lab coats don't make us human. Our humanity does. The audience erupted in applause. Clips of his words went viral overnight, translated into dozens of languages. In Houston, vigils shifted into action. Teachers created respect circles in classrooms. Churches launched mentoring programs. Scientists held workshops under banners reading, "Respect science, respect people." Naomi watched the coverage with awe. "This is bigger than marches. They're building something lasting." Elijah nodded slowly. "That's what it should be. If respect is just a chant, it fades. If it's a habit, it lives." But fame brought strain too. Elijah began receiving relentless calls, networks begging for interviews, universities offering honorary degrees, corporations dangling sponsorships. He turned them all down. One night, exhausted, he admitted to Naomi, "I don't want to be the face of respect. I just want to be the man who wrote the patch." Naomi touched his hand. "Maybe you can be both. But remember, you don't have to carry it alone anymore. The world has picked it up." At NASA, Maya Ortiz checked in with him over video call. "You know, Brooks, Aquila's orbit is stable, but it's not perfect. We'll need more patches, more work." Elijah smiled faintly. "Good, because code doesn't expect speeches. It just expects results." Maya nodded. "And that's why you're exactly the man the world needs, even if you don't want the spotlight." Later, Elijah stood once more on his balcony, looking out at the Capitol dome glowing against the night sky. Naomi joined him. "They see you as a hero," she whispered. Elijah shook his head gently. "I'm not a hero, I'm a reminder. Respect outlives heroes. And that's all I want, for it to outlive me." Above them, Aquila traced its steady orbit, proof that even fragile systems could endure when corrected with care. And far below, a movement that began in suspicion now pulsed with purpose, carrying his words into the world like a second kind of satellite, one built not of steel, but of dignity. By the end of the week, Elijah Brooks's name had circled the globe as quickly as the satellites he worked to protect. News broadcasts called him a man who carried respect into orbit. Foreign leaders quoted his testimony in speeches about justice. Even children in schools across America wrote essays titled, "What Respect Means to Me," inspired by the scientist once mistaken for a suspect. Yet inside his DC hotel room, Elijah felt none of the triumph. He sat hunched over his laptop, scrolling through endless requests, interviews, awards, invitations. His inbox glowed like a storm. Naomi entered with takeout cartons. "You didn't eat lunch or breakfast." Elijah rubbed his eyes. "I've spent the week in front of cameras, Naomi, but code doesn't wait. Aquila needs more stability checks." She set the food down firmly. Elijah, the satellite is safe, but you're wearing down. You can't keep carrying the world on your back. He looked at her, voice low. Maybe the world doesn't care what I can carry. They've already decided I'm a symbol. At the Capitol, lawmakers debated the Respect and Accountability Act. Senators held up Elijah's name as proof of its urgency. If suspicion can nearly cost us a national mission, one thundered, then this law isn't about morality, it's about security. The bill began to pick up bipartisan support. Journalists labeled it the Brooks Effect. Protesters on the Capitol steps waved banners. Pass the Respect Act now. Inside his hotel, Elijah watched the coverage uneasily. I don't want laws named after me, he muttered. Naomi touched his arm. They're not naming it after you. They're naming it after what you stood for. Meanwhile, in Houston, Officer Pierce sat in a disciplinary hearing, the air thick with tension. The chief's voice was cold. You profiled a NASA scientist on the eve of a critical mission. The country sees you as a disgrace. Do you have anything to say? Pierce clenched his jaw. He looked suspicious. The words hung in the air, flimsy against the mountain of evidence. The board chairman shook his head. Suspension is no longer enough. We're recommending termination. Reeves, seated at the back, whispered to a colleague, We're finished. He dragged us all down with him. At NASA, Maya Ortiz stood before her team in Houston. The big screens glowed green. Aquila steady, stable. She smiled, pride softening her voice. Dr. Brooks's patch brought us stability, but it's more than that. His courage reminded the world why science matters. We carry his work forward, not because of headlines, but because the sky depends on it. The team erupted in applause. That evening, Elijah appeared via video link at a United Nations panel. Leaders from across the world listened intently as he spoke from his modest hotel room. I'm not here as a symbol, Elijah began. I'm here as an engineer who believes respect is the first step to progress. If suspicion comes before respect, then science, cooperation, and humanity itself collapse under the weight of fear. Delegates applauded. Translations of his words rippled through headsets in dozens of languages. Elijah sat back, weary but resolute. Naomi, watching from the corner, whispered, You're speaking to the world now. Do you understand that? Elijah exhaled. I understand. I just don't know how long I can keep speaking. In Houston, Pierce wandered his dark apartment, the glow of the television painting his face. Every channel carried Elijah's image, hailed as a global hero. Pierce muttered bitterly, They worship him, they crucify me. He gripped his old badge, tarnished now, and whispered, Respect. It was mine once. But deep inside he knew. Respect was never his to take. It was something he had thrown away the moment he chose suspicion over dignity. Later that night, Elijah stood once more on his balcony. Naomi joined him, arms folded against the cool air. You've spoken to Congress, to the president, to the world, she said softly. What more can you do? Elijah gazed up at the stars, Aquila tracing its silent orbit overhead. Maybe the point isn't what more I can do. Maybe it's whether respect can live without me. Naomi smiled faintly. It already does. You lit the fire. Now it burns on its own. Elijah breathed deep, the weight pressing but no longer crushing. For the first time he believed she might be right. The Capitol lights had faded into memory, and Elijah Brooks finally returned to Houston. The city felt different now, less like home, more like a stage. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. At the grocery store, strangers shook his hand. At the gas station, someone whispered, That's him! A bus drove past with his face on an ad for the Respect and Accountability Act. Naomi noticed his shoulders tightening with each encounter. You can't hide from it, she told him gently. I don't want to hide, Elijah replied. I just want to work. Equations don't need applause. They just need answers. But when he stepped into Johnson Space Center, the clapping that greeted him felt like another set of chains. Maya Ortiz embraced him firmly, her voice warm but knowing. You saved more than Aquila, Elijah. You saved us. He shook his head. I bought us time, that's all. Maya studied him. Time is all science ever gives us. What matters is what we do with it. Across town, Officer Brett Pierce sat slumped in his small apartment. His badge lay on the table, stripped of authority, stripped of meaning. The television replayed Elijah's congressional testimony yet again. Pierce hurled the remote against the wall, his voice ragged. He ruined me. They call him respect. They call me disgrace. Reeves called once more, his voice tired. It's over, Brett. They've terminated you. You're out. Pierce clenched his fists. They'll forget him eventually. Reeves's reply was sharp. No, Brett, they'll forget you. The line went dead. Meanwhile, the respect movement surged beyond U.S. borders. In Paris, students filled the streets chanting, "Respect, pas suspicion." In Nairobi, murals of Elijah's calm face appeared on walls, paired with the words, "Respect is stronger than fear." In Brazil, a senator quoted his testimony during a debate on police reform. Elijah watched the broadcasts with a mix of awe and unease. Naomi sat beside him on the couch. You see, it's not just here. The whole world is carrying it now. Elijah's voice was quiet. Then maybe I can finally step back. Naomi frowned. Respect may not need you to lead, but it still needs you to stand. If you vanish, cynicism wins. At NASA, Elijah buried himself in work. He sat at his desk long after others left, eyes fixed on the code scrolling across his monitor. Aquila still needed fine-tuning, calibration, adjustments. He found peace in the numbers, the quiet logic that never judged him by the color of his skin, only by the precision of his code. Maya stopped by late one night, leaning against the doorway. You're hiding in the math again, she said gently. Elijah didn't look up. The math never cuffs me. Maya crossed her arms. But the world still needs your voice, Elijah, not speeches, just your truth. He finally looked up, exhaustion in his eyes. My truth is tired. Maya gave a small nod. Then let others carry it a while. That's what movements are for. In Houston neighborhoods, that's exactly what was happening. Community centers hosted respect forums where residents shared their own experiences of bias. Schools adopted new programs emphasizing dignity. Local leaders invoked Elijah's words, not to elevate him, but to elevate themselves. At one gathering, a teacher told her students, "Respect isn't Dr. Brooks's gift. It's ours. He just reminded us." The students nodded, scribbling the phrase across notebooks. Pierce, meanwhile, spiraled deeper. Walking through downtown, he overheard chants from a rally. Respect! Respect! His name was gone from every conversation. His disgrace was carved into headlines, his authority erased. He muttered bitterly, "They made him a hero by making me the villain." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. No one made him the villain. He had chosen that role the moment he laughed at dignity. That evening, Elijah sat on his porch with Naomi. The night air was still, the stars faint above Houston's haze. You've been quiet all day, Naomi said. Elijah exhaled slowly. Because I don't know how to be both things at once. The world wants me as a hero. I just want to be a man who solves problems. Naomi leaned against him. Maybe solving problems is what makes you a hero. Not speeches, not rallies, just doing the work when no one else can. He thought for a long moment, then nodded. If that's all they see, then maybe I can live with it. Above them, Aquila sailed steady, invisible to the naked eye, but alive in its orbit, a reminder that fragile systems, corrected in time, could endure. Houston's downtown plaza had never held such a crowd. Banners stretched across lampposts reading "Respect is not optional." The mayor had declared the day Dr. Elijah Brooks Day, and though Elijah himself had resisted, the city pressed forward. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with students, families waved small NASA flags, and news cameras ringed the stage like satellites in orbit. Backstage, Elijah paced, his laptop bag hanging from one shoulder. Naomi tried to calm him. You don't have to give a long speech. Just stand there, let them see you. I didn't save a city, Elijah muttered. I wrote a patch. They're turning code into ceremony. Naomi smiled faintly. Sometimes people need ceremonies. It helps them remember what matters. Maya Ortiz joined them, adjusting her jacket. Elijah, you don't have to carry the movement in your words today. Just show them you're human, that's enough. Elijah sighed. Being human is what nearly cost me my freedom. Maya's eyes softened. And it's what saved theirs. The mayor introduced him with booming praise. A son of Houston, a servant of science, a reminder to us all that respect must guide our steps. Elijah stepped forward, the applause crashing like a wave. Cameras flashed, chants rolled. Respect, respect! He raised a hand. The crowd hushed. I'm grateful, he began, voice steady, but I want to remind you of something. I'm not the movement. I'm just a man who did his job. Respect belongs to you, all of you, when you practice it daily. If tonight is only about me, then we've missed the point. The crowd erupted again, but this time the chants shifted. Not his name, but the word itself, respect, respect. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. Maya smiled proudly. Elijah simply stood, calm in the storm. Far from the cheers, Officer Brett Pierce sat hunched in a dim bar, watching the broadcast on a flickering television. The mayor's words echoed cruelly through the speakers. Patrons cheered when Elijah spoke. Some even raised glasses. Pierce gripped his drink, knuckles white. They cheer him, but they forget me. A man at the bar glanced at him. You? You're the cop who cuffed him, aren't you? Pierce stiffened. The man shook his head. Then you earned this. Respect isn't suspicion, man. You made yourself the example. The words stung sharper than the alcohol. Pierce shoved his glass away, unable to drown the silence growing inside him. The next morning, Elijah's ceremony dominated headlines. Newspapers ran photos of him standing tall under banners of respect. Cable news called it the turning point of the movement. Naomi read aloud from an editorial. Dr. Brooks turned suspicion into strength, humiliation into hope. If Congress does not pass the Respect Act now, they deny the very heartbeat of our democracy. Elijah shook his head. They're writing me into history books I never wanted to be in. Naomi touched his hand. Maybe history doesn't ask what you want, it writes what it needs. At NASA, Maya convened her team. The world may see Elijah as a hero, but we see him as one of us. Let's honor that by doing what we do best, keeping the sky alive. Screens glowed with green telemetry. Aquila remained stable, proof that code and courage could still hold together fragile systems. Back in Washington, momentum for the Respect Act surged. Lawmakers cited Elijah's words daily. Respect without accountability is just a hollow word, one senator thundered. We must fill it with meaning. Public pressure mounted, calls flooded congressional offices, editorials demanded action. The bill moved from committee to the floor. That evening, Elijah returned to his porch, exhaustion heavy in his bones. Naomi joined him, handing him tea. You did well today, she said softly. He shook his head. I only reminded them that respect isn't mine, it's theirs. But I worry they'll forget again once the cameras fade. Naomi leaned against him. Then let them forget. And let them remember again. That's life. The point is, you lit the fire. Elijah looked up at the stars. Somewhere above, Aquila traced its orbit, steady and silent. If they keep it alive without me, then maybe I can finally rest. Naomi smiled. Respect will outlive you, Elijah. That's the proof you needed. In his dark apartment, Pierce watched the news replay Elijah's ceremony. The chants of respect filled the room. He covered his ears, but the echo remained. For the first time, he didn't laugh. He just sat in silence, realizing that respect had slipped beyond his grasp forever. Congress buzzed like a hive as the Respect and Accountability Act reached the floor. Pundits called it one of the most consequential reform bills in a generation. Supporters carried placards through the Capitol corridors, chanting softly, "Respect, respect." Elijah Brooks sat quietly in a waiting room just off the chamber. His laptop bag rested by his feet, though he hadn't opened it all morning. Naomi sat beside him, flipping through briefing papers nervously. You don't have to carry the bill on your shoulders, she said. They've already built momentum. Elijah exhaled slowly. They still want me to speak. They think my words can finish what my code started. Naomi touched his hand. Maybe they're right. Maybe the world needs both. The hearing chamber filled to capacity. Lawmakers leaned forward, pens ready, as Elijah was called once again. Cameras tracked his every step. He adjusted the microphone, gaze steady. 2 weeks ago, he began, I sat in a cell while a satellite drifted toward failure. I was called suspicious because of who I am, not because of what I carried. Hours later, that same laptop saved the mission. Suspicion nearly cost us everything. Respect carried us through. The chamber grew still. Elijah continued, This bill is not about me. It is about whether we choose suspicion first or respect first. If we choose suspicion, we will fail again, whether in missions, communities, or lives. If we choose respect, we succeed together. Applause erupted, rare in such a chamber. Lawmakers rose to their feet. The chant echoed even here. Respect, respect. News of the testimony raced across the country. Headlines screamed, Brooks, suspicion nearly cost us everything, and respect must come first. Social media flooded with clips. Hashtags revived with new force. On college campuses, students organized watch parties. In churches, pastors quoted Elijah's words. In classrooms, teachers wrote the phrase, "Respect carried us through," across chalkboards. Naomi watched it all unfold, pride and worry tangled in her chest. She whispered to Elijah later that night, "You're not just in the movement now, you are the movement." Elijah looked at her quietly. "Then God help me carry it carefully." In Houston, Officer Brett Pierce reached his breaking point. Termination papers arrived by courier, stamped and final. He sat in his apartment surrounded by silence, television glowing with images of Elijah in Congress. He muttered, "They took everything from me. They gave him everything." But the truth gnawed deeper. No one had taken anything. He had thrown it away himself the night he chose laughter over dignity. Reeves called one last time. "Brett, it's over. Let it go. Respect isn't yours to demand. It's earned." Pierce hung up, the silence heavier than before. Back in Washington, momentum built. The Respect Act moved through debate, speeches filled with Elijah's words. One senator declared, "If Dr. Brooks can turn humiliation into hope, then surely we can turn suspicion into law." Public galleries cheered. News tickers blazed. For the first time, Elijah allowed himself to believe the bill might pass. That evening, Elijah sat with Naomi on the hotel balcony overlooking the city. The Capitol dome glowed in the distance. "You carried them again today," Naomi said softly. Elijah shook his head. "No, they carried themselves. I just reminded them." She smiled faintly. "That's why they listen." He gazed at the stars, steady above. Aquila still traced its orbit, alive because of a patch written under pressure. If a system that fragile can be saved, maybe people can be too. Naomi rested her head on his shoulder. "You've already proved it." In his dark apartment, Pierce stared at his tarnished badge one last time before tossing it into a drawer. The chant from the television echoed into the empty room. Respect. Respect. For the first time, he felt not anger, but the hollow weight of being forgotten. And across the nation, communities carried the word forward. Respect painted on murals, shouted at rallies, whispered in classrooms. It was no longer just Elijah's burden, it was theirs. The Senate chamber glowed under television lights as debate over the Respect and Accountability Act reached its peak. Senators shuffled papers, aides whispered, cameras hummed. Outside, thousands gathered with candles and banners, chanting the single word that had become a movement. Respect, respect. Inside his hotel room, Elijah Brooks watched the live broadcast, laptop balanced on his knees. His patch still ran diagnostic sweeps on Aquila, code scrolling in neat lines across the screen, yet his eyes kept drifting to the debate on television. Naomi sat beside him, phone buzzing with constant updates. "They're stalling," she muttered. "Some senators are trying to strip the bill of its teeth." Elijah rubbed his temples. "I wrote code to correct drift, Naomi. I can't write laws to correct people." "You already did," she said softly. "With your words." On the Senate floor, opposition rose sharp and pointed. One senator sneered, "We cannot legislate respect. We cannot make people trust what they do not trust." Another countered fiercely, "If we do nothing, suspicion remains the default." We saw where that leads, with Dr. Brooks in cuffs and a mission seconds from failure. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Elijah's name hung heavy in the air. Reporters filled the hallways, microphones thrust at anyone leaving the chamber. One journalist asked, "Is the Brooks effect enough to carry this bill across the finish line?" Another replied, "If it fails now, the backlash will be historic." Back at NASA, Maya Ortiz stood before her team. She gestured toward the giant screen where the Senate debate played. "Dr. Brooks gave us stability in space. Now the country needs stability here on Earth. If they can't pass this, we'll still carry his message forward." Applause filled the room. Engineers who once saw Elijah only as a colleague now saw him as a reminder of what respect could mean inside and outside the lab. Meanwhile, Officer Brett Pierce sat in the corner of a crowded bar. The Senate debate flashed across the television, Elijah's name echoing in every speech. Patrons booed when opponents of the bill spoke. One man pointed at Pierce. "Aren't you the cop who cuffed him?" Pierce froze. The man shook his head. "Then you're the reason we're even here tonight. Respect outlived you, buddy." Laughter and jeers followed. Pierce lowered his eyes, shame heavier than any punishment. In the hotel room, Elijah closed his laptop, exhausted. Naomi placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You can't fix everything, Elijah. Let them fight the battle now." He shook his head. "I don't want them fighting for me. I want them fighting for the word itself. Respect. If this bill becomes about me, it won't last. Naomi smiled faintly. Then remind them. When you speak, you always remind them. The next day, Elijah was asked to appear briefly in the Senate gallery. Cameras followed his every step. Protesters cheered as he walked up the marble steps, laptop bag slung across his shoulder as always. Inside, senators turned to look. Some bowed their heads, others stiffened. Elijah took his seat quietly, not speaking, but his presence was louder than any speech. When debate resumed, a senator rose and gestured toward him. There sits the man whose dignity we questioned, whose genius we nearly lost. If this chamber cannot pass respect into law, then we have no right to govern. The gallery erupted in applause. Elijah sat still, hands folded, eyes steady. Outside, crowds swelled larger, chants rolling like thunder across the Capitol lawn. Respect is not suspicion. Respect is protection. Signs filled the air, candles flickered, children stood on shoulders shouting the word. Naomi stood at the edge of the crowd, tears in her eyes. She whispered, "They're not chanting his name. They're chanting for themselves now." In the Senate chamber, the vote was called. Numbers lit up on the board, ayes and nays tallying in real time. The room held its breath. Elijah's heart pounded as the final numbers locked in. By the narrowest margin, the Respect and Accountability Act passed. The chamber erupted. Applause shook the rafters. Reporters sprinted for phones. Outside, the crowd roared so loudly it echoed through the marble halls. Naomi rushed to Elijah's side in the gallery, grasping his hand. "You did it," she whispered. He shook his head softly, eyes glistening. "No, they did it." That night, Washington glowed. Crowds marched by candlelight, chanting respect not as a slogan but as a vow. In Houston, vigils filled the streets. Across oceans, foreign leaders praised the passage of the law. In his hotel room, Elijah sat on the balcony, Naomi beside him. The Capitol dome glowed in the distance. He whispered, "Respect stood today. I only pray it keeps standing when the candles burn out." Naomi leaned her head against his shoulder. "It will, because you didn't just give them words. You gave them a way forward." Above them, Aquila sailed steady, its orbit secure. Below, a fragile world had just taken one step closer to its own stability. The Respect and Accountability Act had barely been signed when Elijah Brooks discovered that his life was no longer his own. He couldn't walk down a Houston street without being recognized. Strangers shook his hand, children tugged at his sleeve, cameras followed him even when he ducked into grocery stores. Local news vans parked outside his apartment. His phone buzzed with endless requests for interviews, endorsements, speeches. At first, Naomi tried to manage it, fielding calls, sending polite declines. But the flood was relentless. "They don't see you as Elijah anymore," she said one evening, exhaustion heavy in her voice. "They see you as respect itself." Elijah leaned against the kitchen counter, rubbing his temples. "Respect doesn't need a face, it needs practice. But they keep dragging me into the spotlight." Naomi studied him gently. "Maybe that's the cost of reminding them. You lit the fire, now they want you to tend it." At NASA, Elijah buried himself in code again, desperate for normalcy. Aquila's telemetry still needed fine-tuning, and he found peace in the precise language of algorithms. Lines of logic never asked for autographs. They only asked for accuracy. Maya Ortiz approached his desk late one night. "You've been here 12 hours straight," she said. Elijah kept typing. "The satellite doesn't care how tired I am." Maya crossed her arms. "But I do. You can't burn out, Elijah. The world might see you as a hero, but to us, you're still an engineer. And we need you whole." He finally looked up, his eyes weary. "I don't know how to be both, Maya. A scientist and a symbol. One is logic, the other is weight." Maya softened. "Then let the rest of us help carry the weight. You don't have to do it alone." Across America, the Respect movement took root. Community boards formed under banners reading "Respect Lives Here." Schools launched new curricula about dignity. Police departments announced reforms, citing the act. International leaders referenced it in speeches about cooperation. Naomi watched broadcasts of rallies in cities from Chicago to Los Angeles. Crowds held candles, chanting "Respect, respect," but no longer with Elijah's image on posters. Instead, they carried simple words, "Respect is for everyone." She turned to him, smiling. "Do you see? It's not just you anymore. They've claimed it for themselves. Elijah exhaled slowly. Good. That's how it should be. In Houston, Brett Pierce's life crumbled further. With his badge gone and his name synonymous with disgrace, he wandered the city aimlessly. Former colleagues avoided him. Bars turned cold when patrons recognized his face. He muttered bitterly to himself, "They forgot me. They worship him." But deep inside, he knew the truth. He wasn't forgotten. He was remembered for the wrong reasons. At night, he stared at his tarnished badge in the drawer, hearing the echo of chants outside his window. Respect! Respect! The word that once mocked Elijah now haunted him, louder than any gavel. Back in Washington, invitations poured in for Elijah to speak at universities, corporations, even international summits. He turned down most of them. "I don't want to be a mascot," he told Naomi, but one invitation struck him differently. A request from a local high school in Houston, just a few miles from where he was arrested. Naomi urged him to accept. "It's not cameras or politicians, it's kids who need to see you." Elijah agreed reluctantly. The auditorium was packed with students buzzing with excitement. Teachers lined the walls, pride shining in their eyes. Elijah stepped onto the stage, his laptop bag slung across his shoulder as always. "I'm not here as a hero," he began. "I'm here as proof. Proof that respect matters before suspicion. Proof that dignity saves more than satellites. It saves lives, communities, and futures." The students erupted in applause, many standing. One young boy shouted, "I want to be like you!" Elijah smiled faintly. "Then don't be like me. Be like yourself. Just remember, respect is your foundation." The words rippled through the crowd like a vow. That night, Elijah sat on his porch with Naomi, the sound of cicadas humming in the dark. "You were good today," she said softly. He shook his head. "I just reminded them. The world doesn't need me to be its hero. It needs to remember its own humanity." Naomi leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then keep reminding them, until respect is no longer extraordinary, until it's ordinary." Elijah gazed up at the stars, Aquila still gliding silently above. "If that day comes," he whispered, "then all of this will have been worth it." And for the first time in weeks, he felt the weight on his chest lift, not gone, but shared, carried by millions who had claimed respect as their own. The invitation came from Geneva. The United Nations wanted Dr. Elijah Brooks to address the General Assembly during a summit on international cooperation. The letter called him a voice for dignity that transcends borders. Elijah read it in silence, the words heavy. Naomi watched his expression. "You knew this was coming. Respect didn't stop at Washington, it spread everywhere." "I'm not a diplomat," Elijah muttered. "I'm a systems engineer." Naomi smiled softly. "Maybe that's why they trust you. You speak in truths, not politics." 2 weeks later, Elijah stood beneath the vaulted ceilings of the UN Hall, laptop bag resting against the podium. Delegates from every continent filled the chamber, translators murmuring into earpieces. Cameras broadcast the event live to millions worldwide. He began simply, "I came here as a reminder. Respect is not American, it's not scientific, it's not political. It is human. Suspicion divides us, respect unites us. If we cannot respect one another, then our missions, whether in space or on Earth, will drift into failure." The chamber grew silent, every translator repeating his words. Then applause swelled, echoing across the hall, rising into a standing ovation. Delegates from nations often at odds stood together, clapping in unison. The moment flashed across screens worldwide. In classrooms from Delhi to Dakar, students repeated his line, "Respect is not American, it is human." Back in Houston, Brett Pierce watched the broadcast on his small television. His apartment was dark, curtains drawn. He sat hunched, face lit only by the glow of Elijah's image standing at the UN. The applause burned his ears. He muttered, "They chant his name everywhere. They've erased me completely." He gripped his tarnished badge, whispering, "That should have been me." But even he knew, the badge was never respect. It was only power, and power without respect collapses. For the first time, bitterness gave way to something heavier: regret. Meanwhile, Elijah's message spread further than headlines. In Paris, crowds gathered under the Eiffel Tower, chanting respect in French and English. In Nairobi, artists painted murals of satellites orbiting above open hands, symbolizing dignity guiding fragile systems. In Rio, samba schools wove Elijah's words into song. Naomi showed him clips on her phone as they flew back to Houston. "Look at this, Elijah. They're carrying it. It doesn't belong to you anymore." Elijah exhaled, relief flickering across his face. Good. It was never mine to own. But fame had its costs. In airports, strangers swarmed him for photos. In restaurants, people interrupted meals to shake his hand. His inbox overflowed with invitations to conferences, ceremonies, even political rallies. Maya Ortiz called him one night, her voice firm. "Elijah, you don't have to say yes to everyone. Respect doesn't depend on your schedule. It depends on your truth. Protect yourself or you'll burn out." He nodded quietly. "I hear you. I just don't want to let anyone down." Maya softened. "You've already lifted them up. That's enough." In Houston schools, students now began each day reciting not just pledges, but reminders of respect. One teacher told her class, "Dr. Brooks reminded the world that dignity saves missions and lives. Let's practice it here, every day." Children nodded, carrying the word as if it were theirs to protect. Elijah found comfort in those small echoes. One evening, he spoke at a modest community center in Houston. No cameras, no banners, just families, teachers, and neighbors. He told them, "Respect is strongest when it's ordinary, when it's in your classrooms, your sidewalks, your homes. If it's only on stages, it fades. But if it's here, it lasts." The applause was softer than global ovations, but it filled Elijah with more peace than any UN summit. Back home that night, Naomi sat with him on the porch. The cicadas hummed in the dark. She said quietly, "You're carrying the world, Elijah, but you're also carrying yourself again. I can see it." He gazed up at the stars, Aquila tracing its silent orbit overhead. Maybe that's the lesson. Respect doesn't need me to be larger than life, it just needs me to live. Naomi leaned her head on his shoulder. "And that's why they listen. Because you're not trying to be more than you are." For the first time, Elijah allowed himself to smile, not as a hero, but as a man who had carried respect far enough for the world to take it on its own. By autumn, the word respect had become a fixture of daily life. Murals bloomed on city walls, schoolchildren wrote essays with the phrase as their title, and foreign leaders slipped it into speeches. The Respect and Accountability Act was already reshaping policy at home, while Elijah Brooks's testimony continued to echo across the world. But inside Elijah's Houston apartment, the weight was pressing down. Every knock on the door carried another request: universities offering honorary degrees, corporations wanting him as a keynote speaker, nonprofits begging him to headline campaigns. Naomi tried to manage the flood, sorting stacks of letters and emails. "You can't keep saying yes to everything," she said gently. "It's too much." Elijah sat at the table, shoulders slumped, eyes on his laptop screen where Aquila's telemetry streamed steady. "I don't want to be the voice of a movement," he murmured. "I just want to be an engineer." Naomi closed the laptop gently. "You can be both, but not if you break yourself in the process." NASA tried to shield him. Maya Ortiz called late one night. "Elijah, you've earned the right to step back. You don't need to attend every rally. Respect isn't a flame that dies if you walk away. It's a fire already spreading." Elijah rubbed his forehead. "I know, but every time I see the word painted on a sign or hear it in a chant, I feel like if I'm not there, it will drift out of orbit." Maya's voice softened. "Then trust the world to hold it. You stabilize the system. Now let it fly." Meanwhile in Houston, Brett Pierce faced his own kind of spotlight. Neighbors avoided his eyes. Parents pulled children away when he walked past. Grocery clerks grew cold at the register. One afternoon, he sat at a diner booth alone. A young man recognized him, whispering to a friend, "That's the cop who cuffed Dr. Brooks." Pierce's hands trembled as he gripped his coffee cup. For the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt the hollow ache of being remembered for the worst moment of his life. He left the diner in silence, the word respect spray-painted in bright colors across a wall across the street. At a community center not far from where he had once arrested Elijah, locals held a respect forum. Families, teachers, and students sat in circles sharing stories of bias and dignity. Elijah had been invited but quietly declined. Instead, he sent a handwritten note read aloud. "Respect belongs to you. Practice it here, in your homes, in your streets. Carry it forward, not as my legacy, but as your own." The audience applauded softly. A student whispered, "He's right. It's ours now." But Elijah couldn't escape the pull of public life. That week, the president invited him back to Washington to celebrate the official rollout of the Respect Act. Cameras caught every second, Elijah shaking hands, smiling politely, standing behind the podium as leaders declared, this law would not exist without Dr. Brooks. That night in his hotel room, Elijah confessed to Naomi, every time they say that, I feel more like a statue than a man. Naomi touched his cheek gently. Statues can't speak, Elijah. You still can. That's what makes you different. In Houston, Pierce reached the bottom. His apartment was bare, his savings dwindling. He scrolled through endless articles praising Elijah, each headline another reminder of his disgrace. He muttered bitterly, he became the world. I became nothing. But when he looked in the mirror, he saw not a victim, but the architect of his downfall. For the first time, regret pierced through bitterness. He whispered to his reflection, I did this. Back in Houston, Elijah attended a small gathering at a local school. No cameras, no politicians, just students eager to meet the man they'd read about in their textbooks. One young girl asked shyly, Dr. Brooks, how do you stay brave when people don't respect you? Elijah knelt to meet her eyes. Bravery isn't about never being disrespected. It's about choosing respect anyway. Even when it's hard. The girl smiled, nodding. Teachers wiped tears from their eyes. Naomi whispered afterward, this is the work that matters most. Elijah nodded. Because here, respect isn't extraordinary, it's ordinary, and that's how it should be. That night, Elijah sat once more on his porch, Naomi beside him. The sky above shimmered with faint stars. Somewhere, Aquila still circled, alive because of a patch written in desperation. I'm tired, Elijah admitted quietly. But maybe that's okay. Maybe it means respect is no longer mine to carry. Naomi leaned her head on his shoulder. It never was. You just reminded us. And now the world remembers. For the first time in weeks, Elijah closed his eyes and felt peace, fragile but real. Respect had taken flight beyond him, and he no longer needed to hold it alone. By winter, the Respect Act had moved from the ink of law into the flesh of everyday life. Police academies rewrote training manuals, schools added respect pledges to morning routines, and community boards held regular forums where neighbors spoke openly about bias and dignity. Across Houston, murals of satellites orbiting over clasped hands appeared on walls, painted by young artists who wanted to remind their city that even fragile systems could be corrected. Elijah Brooks's words had become shorthand. Respect first, suspicion later, if ever. Elijah, however, was uneasy with how often his name accompanied the message. At NASA, he told Maya Ortiz, I never wanted respect to be branded with my face. If it's tied to me, it can be broken with me. Maya leaned against the console, her expression calm. It isn't about your face anymore, Elijah. It's about your truth. The world sees itself in you, but it's carrying the word forward without you. He nodded slowly, but the unease remained. Meanwhile, Naomi took on a new role, organizing school programs that carried the respect movement into classrooms. She worked late into the night, drafting lesson plans and speaking to teachers. Elijah, she told him one evening, children are quoting you the way they quote their heroes, but they don't see you as larger than life. They see you as proof that dignity matters. He smiled faintly. Then maybe that's enough. In Houston, Brett Pierce walked through streets that no longer welcomed him. Murals of respect stared back at him from every corner. Strangers muttered when they recognized his face. At one grocery store, the clerk refused his card, muttering, "Not here, not you." Pierce stormed out, bitterness boiling. Yet the sting wasn't anger anymore, it was shame. That night, he pulled the old badge from his drawer, staring at it long. Once it was power, now it was nothing more than a relic of his failure. He whispered to the empty room, "I laughed at a man's dignity, and I lost my own." Back at NASA, Elijah worked late as usual. Aquila's telemetry still glowed on the big screen, a steady pulse against the dark. Maya approached quietly. "You know, you've become more than an engineer to them. But to us, you're still the man who wrote the patch that saved this mission." Elijah smiled softly. "That's the title I'd rather keep." Maya chuckled. "Then keep it. Let the rest of the world call you what it wants." 1 week later, Elijah was invited to a university in Boston to give a lecture. He resisted, but Naomi convinced him. "This isn't a ceremony. It's students who want to learn. Not about the movement, but about the man who stayed calm when it mattered." On stage, Elijah told the crowd, Respect doesn't make equations easier. It doesn't debug code, but it creates the space for work to thrive. Without it, suspicion suffocates progress before it begins. Afterward, a young engineering student approached him. "Dr. Brooks, you reminded me that being seen is as important as being heard. Thank you." For the first time, Elijah felt a quiet pride, not in the ovations, but in the ripple of minds changed. Back in Houston, Naomi organized the first annual Respect Forum, bringing together teachers, veterans, scientists, and families. Elijah sat quietly in the back, listening as others carried the word. A teacher spoke, "Respect isn't Dr. Brooks's gift, it's ours. He just reminded us to claim it." Applause filled the hall. Elijah smiled quietly. For once, he wasn't on the stage. He wasn't the headline. He was simply part of the crowd. And it felt right. But across the city, Pierce reached his lowest point. Alone in his apartment, walls bare, fridge empty, he sat in silence as chants from a nearby rally echoed faintly. "Respect! Respect!" He clenched his fists, but no bitterness came. Only emptiness. He whispered, "They will never forget what I did." For the first time, he realized he didn't want them to forget. He wanted them to remember, so others would never repeat his mistake. That night, Elijah and Naomi sat on their porch, sipping tea under the winter sky. "You've carried this farther than anyone imagined," Naomi said softly. Elijah shook his head. "No, I carried it long enough for others to take it. Now it lives without me." Naomi leaned against him, her voice warm. "That's legacy, Elijah. Not statues, not laws. People carrying what you reminded them of." Above them, Aquila traced its orbit, steady against the night, proof that fragile systems could endure when corrected in time. And below, the word respect pulsed in classrooms, neighborhoods, and lives, not as Elijah's burden, but as everyone's practice. The winter sun poured golden light over Houston the morning of the first National Respect Summit. Delegates from across the country arrived. Teachers, scientists, veterans, community leaders, all gathering not to hear from Elijah Brooks, but to build on what had begun. Elijah sat quietly in the back row of the auditorium, laptop bag at his feet. Naomi leaned close, whispering, "You don't need to speak today. Others will carry it." He nodded, grateful. On stage, a teacher from Atlanta opened the summit. "Respect is not an idea to be celebrated once. It's a practice to be lived daily. We stand here not because of one man, but because a moment reminded us who we are." The crowd erupted in applause. Elijah smiled faintly, content to watch. Throughout the day, voices filled the hall. A police chief described reforms inspired by the Respect Act. A student spoke of finding courage in Elijah's story. A veteran reminded the crowd that dignity was the foundation of service. Each voice wove together into something larger than any single story. For the first time, Elijah felt the full weight lift. Respect no longer depended on him, it lived on its own. Naomi squeezed his hand. "You see, legacy doesn't mean carrying it forever, it means letting go." Elijah exhaled slowly. "Then maybe I can finally rest." Across town, Brett Pierce wandered the streets near the plaza. He stopped at a mural painted on the side of a building. Aquila orbiting above the word respect in bold letters. Children posed for photos in front of it, their laughter ringing. Parents pointed at the painting, explaining the story of the scientist who saved a satellite after being cuffed in the rain. Pierce lowered his head, shame burning his chest. He whispered, "That was the night I lost everything." For the first time, he didn't blame Elijah. He blamed himself. At the summit, reporters still searched for Elijah. Eventually, one cornered him during a break. "Dr. Brooks, what do you think when you see how far respect has come?" Elijah answered calmly, "It means I no longer need to be the face of it. Respect belongs to everyone now. If it ends with me, it fails. If it lives with you, it endures." The reporter nodded, struck silent. That evening, the summit closed with a candlelight vigil. Thousands gathered in the plaza, holding candles that glowed like stars against the night. Voices rose in unison. "Respect! Respect!" Elijah stood with Naomi in the crowd, not apart but among them. For the first time, no one asked him to take the stage. No one thrust a microphone toward him. He was simply another light in the sea of thousands. Naomi whispered, "This is how it should be." Elijah nodded, eyes shimmering. Yes, respect doesn't need a symbol anymore. It has become ordinary, and that is extraordinary. Meanwhile, Pierce stood at the edge of the crowd, unseen, candle in hand. He watched the chants roll like thunder through the night. Tears stung his eyes as he whispered, "Respect. I mocked it and I lost it. But maybe I can still learn it." For the first time, he didn't feel like an outcast. He felt like a man who had to start again. When the vigil ended, Elijah and Naomi walked home under the quiet night sky. The streets were calm, the city hushed, but the echo of chants still lingered in the air like a heartbeat. Naomi asked softly, "Do you think it will last?" Elijah looked upward, where Aquila traced its steady orbit above. Satellites drift if left unchecked. People do too. But when corrected in time, they endure. Respect will last, as long as we keep correcting ourselves. Naomi leaned her head against his shoulder. Then Adalet Yerini Buldu, justice stood. Elijah smiled, peace settling deep in his chest. For the first time since the night of the cuffs, he believed it was true. And so it ended. Not with one man carrying the world, but with millions carrying a single word forward: respect. It had begun in suspicion, but it endured in dignity, and in that endurance, justice had finally found its place.